What are the economic implications of a judge telling President Obama no on his attempt to shut down offshore drilling? Joining us now, former Congressman Barry Goldwater Jr. and economist Don Boudreaux and Ann Lee. Today's panel of freedom fighters. Professor Lee, to you first. You told one of my producers that the president should just declare the Gulf of Mexico to be an emergency and suspend the law and take over. You didn't really mean that, did you?
I do mean it, because we have a situation that no one knows how to control. This thing has been leaking for over 2 months at 100,000 barrels a day. It is destroying all the wildlife there. It could cause health problems for millions of people who live along the shores. It is an emergency, and I think in those cases you have to suspend the law in order to deal with an emergency.
Congressman Goldwater, the president can't suspend the law. He has an oath to uphold the law and to uphold the Constitution. She doesn't know what she's talking about.
Good morning, Judge. You're absolutely right. That's wishful thinking. Turn the Gulf area over to the federal government. They can't even run Amtrak, Medicare, Social Security. I don't know anything the government has that is run well. What we need is good regulation and enforcement and oversight by the Congress, but let the private sector do what they do best. And that they know the oil business. The federal government has no clue.
Professor Boudreaux, what are the economic consequences of a blanket moratorium in the Gulf of Mexico because one of the 33 wells that the government authorized became a disaster without basis, without evidence, without inspection? The government presumes to shut down the other 32.
Yeah, I mean, it throws a dagger into one of the major industries, the major industry in that region. I'm from South Louisiana. I'm from New Orleans, and I have a lot of friends in there who are very worried about this moratorium. They don't like it. And look, what Professor Lee said, this isn't Venezuela, this isn't Russia. We don't go around just, taking people's property just because an accident happened. It's a serious accident for sure, but just because, as she said, no one knows what to do, turning it over to the government isn't going to magically produce people who know what to do.
How about it? The government doesn't know how to do these things that Congressman Goldwater talked about. The government has never dealt with a well at 5,000 feet below the ocean, and the government doesn't have the constitutional power to suspend the laws it took an oath to uphold.
The government has overridden laws, suspended them in numerous historical precedents. Even as recent as George Bush, he had suspended habeas corpus on the war of terrorism, which arguably is not necessarily an emergency. So there is precedence for it if there's a dire situation.
Congressman Goldwater, the Supreme Court invalidated President Bush's suspension of habeas corpus. The president isn't a prince or a king. He's got to obey the same laws as the rest of us, right?
Well, right. But we need national policy. And national policy is lacking in this country. For instance, the Congress passed and authorized billions of dollars to use corn to create ethanol. Now, that's destroying our relations with Mexico because the price of a tortilla has gone up. So don't tell me that the government and the Congress knows what's going on. They have no clue.
Would the three of you hang on for just a moment? We're right back with our freedom fighters. Now more with our freedom panel. Freedom fighters, former Congressman Barry Goldwater Jr. and economist Don Boudreaux and Ann Lee. This week, the Business Roundtable, which has supported the president in the past, came out and blasted the White House, calling it hostile to business. Is it hostile to business? Professor Lee?
What's hostile is that policies keep changing so much, and when people have political uncertainty, they're not going to invest. And that is the problem. But just simply having government...
Has the president created political uncertainty with policies changing from day to day?
I would agree with that statement.
You would agree with that statement. Professor Boudreaux, this is a White House that intimidated banks into taking loans that they didn't want, that intimidated the bondholders of GM and Chrysler into subordinating their interests that they didn't want, which intimidated BP into coughing up $20 billion that it didn't want. And earlier this week, it tried to intimidate insurance carriers into not doing what they have the right to do, raise premiums, until the new law kicks in. What are the consequences in the long term, Professor Boudreaux, to central planning by politicians in Washington?
disaster. Look, if this keeps up, we will be a banana republic. These are banana republic policies. And as Professor Lee rightly said, this is creating a lot of uncertainty. That's what kept the Depression going on for so long in the 1930s. It wasn't the economy itself, but the New Deal policies were so interventionist. They kept changing from year to year, and investors didn't know what to do, so they didn't invest.
Your father, Congressman Goldwater, risked the wrath of people in his own party when he attacked these New Deal policies, when he warned against the Fed printing money. The federal debt is now $14 trillion. Isn't it time we audited the Fed, that we knew more about what this super secret bank is doing to our economy?
Well, absolutely. The Fed is almost a fourth leg of our economy and our government. And yet we know little about what they're doing and about what their policies are. They even control the supply of gold at Fort Knox, and yet we have no accounting on the amount of gold that we have in Fort Knox. The Federal Reserve is out of control. It is, in my opinion, the primary cause of these economic meltdowns that we've had back through the past years. The dot-com bubble, the savings and loan problems, and now the meltdown in the mortgage-backed securities. The Federal Reserve has been the basis of all that, and we need to know more about what they're doing.
Does the government, when it centrally plans the economy, have as its goal short-term gain or long-term gain? You have argued that the government should not make decisions on the basis of short-term gain.
This is true. I believe that the government can plan for long-term gains. You look at China, and their government has basically been very involved with the economy, and yet they've been able to create a very entrepreneurial economy as well.
But we don't have an entrepreneurial economy in this country. We have a government-regulated economy. We have private ownership and government. Even you, a progressive, would agree with that, wouldn't you?
I would agree. That's too blanket a statement, but I would say that we probably need better regulations, not necessarily just more regulations.
All right. But you do want the word free in the free market.
I would agree to having standards and sticking to them.
Got it. Congressman Goldwater, Professor Boudreau, Professor Lee, thanks for joining us.